Tonight we have a special treat for our banquet speaker. Don Klaser is a man about the astronomical community of Metro Detroit. You may know him as a television personality from the monthly Astronomy for Everyone television show, which is on a number of community cable outlets as well as on YouTube. He has been interested in astronomy since he first went out in his parents' backyard with a map of the night sky from National Geographic. Now, this was in Roseville. The skies were a lot darker then, and finding things was a little bit easier than it is now. He used a white light flashlight, but who knew? He took a couple courses in astronomy at Macomb College, but didn't do much after that until one weekend when he was up north in a canoe out on a small lake during new moon. The Milky Way shone so brightly overhead, and from then on he was hooked, and he hasn't looked back. Don currently works for Cranbrook Institute of Science and Michigan Science Center, primarily giving presentations at both planetariums, and is a member and former president of the Ford Amateur Astronomy Club. He operates the AV. He's the man in the control room at every one of our meetings at Cranbrook, and so we all owe him a great debt. And in addition to that, he's giving us a great presentation. So without further ado, I give you Don Klaser.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can everybody hear that back there? This is probably a really directional mic, like the one at Cranbrook. So when you do that, then you can't hear a thing. All right. Well, hopefully I can also project as well, and you'll be able to hear the presentation. As you can see, it's oops. There we go. Be careful what I touch up here. It's about Skylore and mythology. In full disclosure, this has been distilled from a 4-part series I did last year on Astronomy for Everyone called Skylore and Mythology. So, what is mythology? Where did it come from? In his book, The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell talks about the universality of myths. Quote, mankind's one great story, unquote, that occurs throughout history, regardless of culture or epoch. They are seen as an integral part of their culture. And in his book, Mythology, Thomas Bulfinch presents several theories. First, historical, where all persons mentioned were once real human beings, whose legends and traditions were embellished over time. Second, allegorical, that all myths were symbolically teaching some moral, religious, or philosophical idea, but which later came to be taken literally. And third, physical, by which the elements of air, fire, and water were given personifications of deities with supernatural powers that explained their existence. So, is it any wonder that these attributes were transferred to the sky from which they came? We're going to hear and examine 10 astronomical entities, 7 constellations, the moon, the Milky Way, and an asterism. We'll hear the familiar Greco-Roman stories, but in addition, we'll also hear what other cultures had to say about these same objects. Ursa Major. In the Greco-Roman story, Jupiter would, from time to time, come down from Mount Olympus to seek out earthly maidens who caught his eye. One of them was Callisto, and when her son was born, she named him Arcus. Juno, Jupiter's wife, was very jealous of these mortal women and tried in every way she could to punish them for stealing Jupiter's affections. She told Callisto, I will take away your beauty by turning you into a bear, and when others see how ugly you have become, they will know their fate if they dare offend me. For years, Callisto roamed through the forests, while Arcus grew into a strong young man, and great hunter. One day he saw a bear and was about to shoot it, not realizing it was his mother. Jupiter saw what was happening and came down to stop it. He turned Arcus into a bear and then grabbed both of them by their tails, picking them up over his head, swung them and flung them up into the northern sky. In doing so, he stretched out their tails, thus explaining the long tails on sky bears. When Juno saw Callisto shining in such a prominent place in the sky, she raged. I made her ugly, but now she is beautiful again. Still seeking her revenge, she went to Neptune and asked him to drive the big bear from the waters and never let her bathe in the sea as all the other stars do. Neptune granted her request. At the latitude of Greece, Ursa Major is circumpolar. Now the Greeks didn't understand the celestial mechanics of why some stars set and others didn't. Trying to explain this, Homer writes in the Odyssey, quote, "The great bear, which alone of the stars will never enter the bath of the ocean," unquote. To the Kiowa tribe of Native Americans, this represented 8 children playing, 7 sisters and their brother. Suddenly, the boy began to tremble and run on his hands and feet. His fingers became claws, and his body was covered with fur. Where a boy had been, there now stood a bear. The sisters were terrified. They ran, and the bear ran after them. The sisters came to the stump of a great tree, and it spoke to them. It told them to climb up on it, and as they did, it began to rise up into the air. The bear tried to kill them, but they were just beyond its reach. The bear reared up against the rising stump and scored its bark with his claws. The stump continued to rise, and the sisters were carried into the sky and became the stars of the Big Dipper. And to this day, the Kiowa say they have family in the sky.
Wow.
During slavery, escaping slaves were told to always keep the Big Dipper, part of the Big Bear, in front of them as they traveled at night. A song, "Follow the Drinking Gourd," was used to reinforce this idea because the Big Dipper resembled a drinking vessel used in the fields. Some sources discount this idea, but it does make sense because unless you had a compass, not likely, how could you know if you were heading in the right direction? To the Egyptians, the Big Dipper was known as the bull's thigh in their Book of the Dead. Its shape was also shown as a tool known as a meschetchel, used to open the mouth of a mummy so that the breath of life could be placed into it, thus giving it eternal life. This can be seen in this image of the north wall of King Tut's tomb, where the new pharaoh, Ai, on the right, is using it to restore life to Tut's mummy. The Big Dipper was known as one of the imperishables, so called because it didn't set or die like so many others did. Mizar and El-Kor. Numerous cultures have related stories about the middle star in the handle of the Big Dipper, which is a naked-eyed double star. The Arabs called it the horse and rider. Native Americans said it was the papoose on the old squaw's back. And in England, it was Jack on the middle horse. Various sources indicate that Mizar and El-Kor were used by several cultures as a test of visual acuity. Corona Borealis. In Greco-Roman mythology, this constellation is associated with Ariadne. Ariadne was the daughter of King Minos of Crete. According to the legend, Minos' son died during some games that were organized in Athens. In retribution, the king attacked Athens and won. He then imposed a heavy burden on the city. He demanded that 7 young men and 7 young women be sent to Crete every year to be sent for sacrifice into the labyrinth beneath his palace, where the Minotaur dwelt. The Minotaur was a half-bull, half-human creation. One year, when the 14 young people of Athens were about to be sent to Crete, Theseus, son of the king of Athens, volunteered to be sent to kill the Minotaur and end the sacrifices for good. When they arrived, Ariadne fell in love with Theseus and decided to help him in his quest. She gave him a sword, as well as a ball of thread. She said to tie one end near the entrance and let it unroll as he went deeper and deeper into the twisting paths. When Cepheus found the Minotaur, he killed him, and then followed the thread back to the entrance, where Ariadne was waiting. She then eloped with him back to Athens. But when their ship stopped at the island of Naxos, Theseus abandoned her. The god Dionysus, seeing her in great sorrow, offered to marry her, and as a wedding gift, gave her a gold crown with 7 diamonds. When she died, he placed the crown in the sky to honor her. Now, if you're thinking this would make a great opera, it did. In 1912, Richard Strauss wrote Ariadne on Naxos, in case you're interested. To the Shawnee tribe of Native Americans, this group of stars is known as the Celestial Sisters. A mighty hunter named Whitehawk came upon a circle worn into the grass with no path leading up to it. As he stood there wondering, he saw a silver basket drop down from the sky, and 12 beautiful maidens got out and danced around the basket in the ring worn into the grass. Whitehawk tried to capture one of the maidens to be his bride, but before he could reach one, they all jumped back into the basket and were carried up into the sky. The next day, he disguised himself as a rabbit and hid close to the circle, determined to capture the most beautiful maiden. When they came down to dance, he immediately returned to human form, grabbed the most beautiful maiden, and carried her back to his village to be his bride. After a while, she became homesick. So, one day, while Whitehawk was away hunting, she made a silver basket, jumped in, and singing a chant, went back up into the sky. But, try as she might, she could never get back to her sisters, and is seen today as one of the bright stars near the crown, Arcturus in Bootes. As a result, her place in the circle of the Celestial Sisters was never filled, so a gap was left, which changed the constellation from a circle to a crown. To the Aboriginal Australians, they called this the boomerang, because the arrangement of the stars suggests that weapon to them. Scorpius. One Greco-Roman story goes like this. Orion was a boastful hunter, claiming he could slay all of Earth's animals. To stop him, Gaia, the Earth goddess, placed a scorpion along his path. The scorpion stung Orion on his heel, killing him. His lover, Diana, begged Jupiter to place him in the sky so she could see him as she drove the chariot of the moon across the sky. Jupiter agreed, but put the scorpion there as well, to remind others to not be so boastful. Jupiter also placed them on opposite sides of the sky to prevent further trouble. In the cultures of Sumeria, Babylon, to the Aboriginal Australians, as well as the Mayan and the Aztec, All of these identified this pattern of stars with a scorpion. Now, Libra was once part of Scorpius. The two brightest stars were the claws of the creature. To the Polynesians, this pattern was a fishhook and was known as Maui's fishhook. A legendary hero, Maui stole the fishhook from his brother. When he went fishing, he managed to snag it on the bottom of the ocean. He tugged and he tugged until it finally came loose, or so he thought. When he pulled it up, he saw that he had hooked an island, complete with grass, trees, and people. Proud of his feat, he tossed the fishhook up into the sky, where it is to this day. The island he pulled up is called Te Ika a Maui, the fish of Maui. We call it New Zealand. The Egyptians saw the claw stars of Scorpius as a scale, as did the Greeks. The Egyptians used this scale to weigh the heart, the soul of a person, against a feather. If the soul was lighter, you went to the afterlife in the heavens. If heavier, you were sent to the darkness of the underworld. Andromeda. Associated in many cultures with the story of the damsel in distress. The constellation is thought to be Phoenician, which they called Adamat. The story may even be Babylonian in origin, appearing in their great epic of creation, going back over 3,000 years. In the Greco-Roman story, Andromeda is the daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Now, Andromeda was chained to a rock to be devoured by a sea monster. Why would her father do this? Well, the oracle told him to. Cassiopeia was a very vain woman. The women always get the bad rap, right? She claimed that she was more beautiful than the sea nymphs. Well, this upset the sea nymphs. They went to Neptune, who said, how could a mortal woman claim to be more beautiful? So he sent a sea monster to ravage the coast of the kingdom. The king went to the oracle. The oracle said, to save your kingdom, sacrifice your daughter. Now, he loved his daughter, of course, but he was also a good king. So Andromeda was chained to a rock by the seashore. As the monster approached, the hero, Perseus, arrives, just in the nick of time. Pulls the head of the Gorgon Medusa out of a sack, holds it up in front of Cetus. The monster turns to stone, sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Perseus rescues Andromeda, and they live happily ever after. During the Middle Ages in Europe, there was the story of St. George and the dragon. During the Middle Ages, a dragon was used as a metaphor for the devil. And here in the picture we can see St. George slaying the dragon and saving the fair damsel there in the background. A very similar story is told in parts of Africa. And in Japan, the hero Susanoo rescues the beautiful daughter of an old couple from a giant serpent. Now again, this story of the damsel in distress shows up throughout cultural and mythology. We even see the story, if anybody watches the old silent movies, where the evil banker wants the deed to the ranch, and the young woman won't give it to him, so he ties her up, and he throws her on the railroad tracks. Well, of course, the hero shows up just in time, and, well, again, the story of the damsel in distress. Orion the Hunter. Another Greco-Roman story goes like this. Long ago, there was a great dark space in the sky where Orion is today. How is it that he came to fill this empty space? The ancient story says that Diana, goddess of both the moon and hunting, fell in love with Orion, the greatest hunter of his time. It was Diana's duty to drive the moon chariot to lighten the darkness of night, while her brother Apollo drove the sun chariot. Because of her love for Orion, she began to neglect her responsibilities to come down to earth and hunt with him. When Apollo learned that his sister had fallen in love with a mortal and was no longer attending to her duties, he decided to do away with Orion. He saw his chance one afternoon when Orion was swimming far from shore. He shone the sun's rays so brightly that the swimming figure became just a small dot in the waves. Then, knowing how proud Diana was of her hunting skills, he challenged her to hit the far-off target. Not knowing that it was Orion she was aiming at, her deadly shot hit its mark, killing him. When Orion didn't show up for their hunting trip, Diana went looking for him. As she stood at the shore, his body washed up, and she realized what she had done. She placed his body in her chariot and drove into the sky where the dark space was. And suddenly, the sky was filled brightly with the stars of his shoulders, feet, jeweled belt, and glittering sword. At his feet, she placed his favorite hunting dogs and marked each one with a bright star. Sirius in the big dog and Procyon in the little dog. For the Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest, this group of stars represented a male figure who paddles a canoe and owns the fog that he keeps in a box. He hunts an otter that escapes into the sky and becomes the Pleiades. To the Egyptians, this was Osiris, the god of death and recreation. It is said that the orientation of the pyramids was based in part on this constellation. To the northern Aboriginal Australians, this was Jolpan, a canoe that held 3 brothers, the belt stars, that were fishing. They hadn't caught anything in a while and were quite hungry. One of the brothers finally caught one, but it was the sacred fish, the one that couldn't be eaten, marked by M42. Well, he was so hungry he ate it anyway. This angered Sun Woman, who sent a waterspout that carried all 3 brothers and their boat up into the sky forever. Betelgeuse and Rigel are the bow and the stern. But for the southern Aboriginal Australians, to them this was Bayami, the creation god. Now remember, south of the equator, Orion appears upside down. To them, he's in this position because he trips over the horizon as he sets. In one hand, he holds a shield in his right hand there, which is typical for us, but in his left hand, he holds a boomerang instead of a club or a sword. Taurus the Bull. In 2500 BC, the vernal equinox was in Taurus. To the Egyptians, the sacred bull marked the renewal of life and the land. This constellation was associated with a bull in many cultures. In Babylon, it was the bull of heaven, sent by the goddess Ishtar to destroy the hero Gilgamesh, who had spurned her advances. For the Greeks, Zeus disguised himself as a bull to abduct Europa, the daughter of the king of Tyre. He carries her across the Mediterranean Sea to the Isle of Crete. This act is said to be the origin of the cult of the bull on both Crete and Minos. In Persia and ancient Rome, the bull was associated with the cult of Mithricism, popular in both cultures. Originating in Persia, it was carried to Rome by returning soldiers. This religion was seen by some early church leaders as a threat to Christianity. Gemini. In Tasmania, they are the two ancestor men who created fire, walking along the road that is the Milky Way. In Greek mythology, two brothers, one mortal, Castor, and the other immortal, Pollux, both sons of Zeus by different women. One a mortal, the other a goddess. According to the ancient legends, they were placed in the sky by Zeus to reward them for their bravery, as they accompanied Jason aboard his ship, the Argo, in his search for the Golden Fleece. In a display of brotherly affection, when his brother was killed in battle, Pollux gave up half of his immortality to Castor, so they could share life and death together. Gemini has been associated with the electrical phenomenon at sea known as St. Elmo's fire, a type of electrical spark of plasma caused by an imbalance in charge that concentrates around pointed objects. To the Aboriginal Australians, this group of stars was the Wadi Kutjara, the lizard men. A group of women is being chased by a man named Kulu. To save the women, the lizard men throw their boomerangs at Kulu and kill him. Kulu's blood drains out, and he turns white and rises up into the sky to become the moon. As Earth's only natural satellite, it has been the fascination for both astronomers and astrologers alike. In many early cultures, they regarded the sun and moon as a pair, providing light for both day and night. The moon was the shy one, who would even hide for a few nights every month. Now, depending on the culture, the moon was seen as either male or female. To the peoples of the South Pacific, they saw the moon as female and named her Haina, the first woman, and all women were made in her image. Lunar fertility cults were headed by high priestesses who held considerable political power. "5,000 years ago, in the city of Ur, in Mesopotamia, the moon god Nana was the patron god of the city and the father of the sun, named Utu. A large priesthood built ziggurats, large step-shaped buildings where he was worshipped. The king was regarded as the living image of Nana and was therefore unavailable to rule during each 3-day period of lunar darkness, when the queen would handle the affairs of state. Moon worship spread throughout the Middle East and continued for thousands of years. In a number of Native American cultures, the moon lived with his wife, the sun, in a windowless stone house from which they both refused to leave, so the world remained in darkness. Eventually, an angleworm drilled many tiny holes in the walls, into which a gopher inserted fleas. What a kidder. What a kidder. The sun and moon were tortured by the insects, so to escape them, they both burst out of the house and up into the sky, bringing light to the world. During the time of the pharaohs, Isis, the wife of Osiris, was identified not only with the star Sirius, but also with the moon. She was a very important deity with power over the mysteries of motherhood. Depicted in human form, she was often crowned with cow horns, encasing a sun disk. One statue of her bears the inscription, quote, "I am that which is, has been and shall be. My veil no one has lifted. The fruit I bore was the sun." Unquote. In India, the moon was one of the 4 children of Earth, and with the sun created the stars and regulated the powers of life on Earth. Humans were assigned the role of caretakers of creation and maintained unity between heaven and earth, which were linked by the great world tree. When the tree grew large, it blocked the light of the sun and the moon, and the world was in darkness. So the people chopped it down, allowing the light to return. But then the link with heaven was lost. The story of the great world tree is also told by the Mayans and the Scandinavians. The Milky Way has had descriptive or fanciful names in every age. One reoccurring theme across many cultures is the river of heaven. It's also seen as a road or a pathway. To the Greeks, it was seen as one of the heavenly circles, along with the equator, the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, the horizon, the meridian, and the ecliptic. In Babylon, one story says it is a trail left by a grain thief as he fled. In China, it's known as the Heavenly River. To the Vikings, it was the path of the ghosts, also known as Wotan's Way, used by those killed in battle to reach Valhalla. Many Native American tribes also saw the Milky Way as the path to heaven, but they also saw the bright stars that lie along the path as the campfires of departed warriors. And 2 cultures, separated by great distance, the Inuit of the far north and the Kalahari Bushmen of southern Africa, both cultures called it the Ashen Path, whose glowing embers lit the way home for night travelers. To the Egyptians, it was Nut, the goddess of the sky. She was the mother of Osiris, the creator god. Shown with her husband Geb, god of the earth, this is a reversal of the usual father sky, mother earth theme. The Pleiades. To the Greeks, they represented the 7 daughters of Atlas, who were being pursued by Orion. Zeus placed the sisters in the sky to protect the girls from his amorous advances. To the Chippewa tribe, they called this the hole in the sky, connecting this world with the star world. They also tell a story about 7 brothers who dance and sing every night in their honor. And to the Aboriginal Australians of the southeast part of the continent, this is Kirk, 7 sisters who alone possessed the secret of fire. Each sister carried a live coal on the end of their digging stick. Through trickery, Crow was able to gather up these coals in a kangaroo skin bag and carry them to mankind so they could have fire. Anybody recognize the bright star to the left? Deborah. Deborah. Indeed. But this crowd knows it's astronomy.
A little bit. He leaves us all the time. I'm glad of that.
In this presentation, we have heard a similarity in stories about some of these constellations in cultures separated by time and distance. And yet, we've also heard completely different stories about these same ones. Are the similarities there because these are the stories we've carried with us as we spread out to populate our world over countless millennia, mankind's one great world story, according to Campbell? So why are there differences? Why are there different stories about the same star pattern? Are these due to the perception of the individual, regardless of any commonality we share as a species? But whether the stories are different or the same, both inches theories are still present. A pathway that will, hopefully, lead us to an understanding of our place in the universe. Thank you.
Any questions?
I got a quick question.
Quick question.
Orion,
Yeah.
the native description of the fog in a box, I'm assuming that was the Orion Nebula, or no?
It never did mention what they describe as the fog, but the Pacific Northwest is a very foggy environment.
Yeah.
So whether it referred to M42 or just their environmental surroundings, it never really made that very clear.
Did anyone in any of these cultures manage to say, this is all complete nonsense? All right? These are not gods. They are not going to help you.
But they do help you with figuring out when to plant stuff, when to figure
Yeah,
out
the stars themselves, sure. I'm sure there were some naysayers. People were really no different back then than we are today. We think we're smarter. We know a few more things than they did, but basic human nature really hasn't changed.
Naysayers in this room? No chance.
Oh, of course. Yes, we speak the truth,
I mean,
whether we know it or not.
in a lot of cases, like having stories around things gives you a mnemonic for remembering what things are. And I don't know, we look at a lot of things in physics and think that we understand them, but fundamentally we really don't. So
No, we don't.
1,000 years from now, if we're so lucky as to still be around as a species, those people then might look back at us and say, ah, gravitational waves.
But at least we know we don't.
Not most people.
Right, well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.